West Michigan Week begins the vetting of GOP candidates for U.S. Senate with the August 7th primary looming. Who will confront incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow? We'll discuss peace, liberty, and prosperity and limited government with Libertarian candidate Scotty Bowman on West Michigan Week. And thank you for joining us on West Michigan Week. On our panel, Doug Copeman, Professor of Political Science at Calvin College. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, Patrick.
And David Murray with M Live Media Group. Thank you, sir. And our guest is Scotty Bowman. You're running as in the Republican path.
Running in the Republican primary. I am philosophically a libertarian.
Yes, you are, and you're running for U.S. Senate.
Correct.
Big field. We have 8 in there now. You're the first one in on the show. We want to thank you for stopping by.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Tell us a little bit about your campaign. It seems very conservative views in this pack, but you stand out as the libertarian. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I've actually been involved in libertarian politics for a long time through the Libertarian Party, and I adopted basically the philosophy that I still hold to today as a result of reading the works of Ayn Rand back in the late 1980s. And in fact, I started out being quite different than that when I started reading her works, and was in a sense transformed. And since then, the basic principle that people have a right to their own lives, and that there are certain God-given inalienable rights that we have unless our exercise of those rights is taken away by others. Those ideas have stuck with me and have been my guiding light throughout my campaign. Now, in 2008, for instance, I also ran for U.S. Senate, and at that time I ran as a Libertarian. But this time I've decided to run as a Republican, and there were a few reasons went into that. Part of it, of course, is there's a high probability of a Republican or Democrat winning the general election, as opposed to a Libertarian candidate as an uphill battle that I have plenty of experience with. One example that really guided my decision as well was that of Ron Paul, who had run as a Libertarian in 1988, and inspired a lot of people, but did not really break through to the general populace. Most people did not know he existed, did not know who he was. When he ran then in 2008, or starting in 2007 through 2008 as a Republican, people took notice of him. So I'm trying to have people take notice, not just of me, but of the ideas I'm putting forth, which essentially I'm hoping I'm a good vehicle of presenting those views.
You guys are ready to jump in.
I am ready to jump in. The libertarian ideas are finding a little more welcome in the Republican Party at the national level. You see, actually, Ron Paul has been in, and he gets a pretty reliable 10 percentage points in these primaries, and characterized partly by young people, and then also lower income males. Do you find those sorts of groups attracted to your candidacy, or how are you? Who's following you? Who seems to pick up on your message? How is that working within the Republican primary in Michigan, in the Senate primary?
What I find is when I speak to different groups, there's usually somebody in the group or some people in the group that will already identify with what I'm saying. Right. In some cases, it's somebody who didn't really realize there was anyone running that really was as close to their personal feelings as I am. And I've had that happen at a number of the Tea Party forums I've spoken at, where there'll be a few people that will walk up to me afterward and tell me that they were really happy that one person stood up and presented the viewpoint that I brought up. For instance, at the forum in DeWitt, which was near Lansing, where we had in fact, all of the candidates that are still involved were actually present, though Rick Wilson and Chuck Marino had to sit out due to a scheduling issue. And at that forum afterward, I had a person walk up, later became a dedicated supporter, who was impressed by me being the only person who said that the government had no business defining marriage, that it be a matter that people contract with privately, and a matter often as a religious sacrament determined and defined within the church. And that person then became a supporter. So I pick up people along the way who are listening to all the candidates and hear something that they identify with from me. I also speak to other groups that wouldn't be caught dead at the Tea Party forum. For instance, I am very strong in the medical marijuana issue, and actually I have been to Tea Party groups where they also sympathized with my point of view on that. But where many of the people, though, that hold positions regarding drug legalization and even softer measures like the current medical marijuana law, do not see even Republicans, and definitely not Tea Partiers, as anyone they would identify with, but they identify with me because I'm standing out on this position where the Democrats, if they somehow imagine to be sympathetic to their point of view, clearly do not.
Okay. Explain to me, I guess, we have a jungle Republican primary for U.S. Senate. There's 8 candidates at least, if everyone gets their petitions in and the number of petitions in on time in early May. There probably are fewer than that, though, who will meet that hurdle. Explain to me the way to you playing a significant role in the primary. Do you see yourself winning? Do you see yourself being a kingmaker? Do you see yourself or is it more of a movement around an issue or a couple of issues that you just want to keep alive in the debate? Explain the rationale for Scotty Bowman.
Well, there is this range, and of course at the top of the range is winning. At the bottom of the range, at the very least, is definitely being a influencer of views, of guiding the debate in a certain direction and creating a movement. And so I see it as a win-win, regardless of the outcome, which I would hope would be literal victory in the election. Regardless of the outcome, I see it as a win-win because I'm reaching more people with an issue, with a field of issues that I consider very important, all being united under the basic idea of very limited government and respect for individual rights.
Go ahead.
Senator Stabenow is in her second term. She beat a formidable challenger last time in Joe Bouchard. Why do you think she's vulnerable?
Well, I think one of her biggest vulnerabilities happened just recently, and it's an issue that basically happened almost under cover of darkness in the sense that there were other things like, I don't know, Kim Kardashian's marital problems or something that tended to take the spotlight and trend much higher at the time. But as far as our real future of this republic, Debbie Stabenow voted in favor of the National Defense Authorization, I can say appropriate because it's the appropriation bill, but the National Defense Authorization Act, which there's nothing wrong with a National Defense Authorization Act. It keeps our troops paid. But what the problem was, it included this amendment that was drafted by Senator Carl Levin and Senator John McCain that essentially gives the president powers that one would normally associate with martial law, where he could order troops to arrest people on American soil and have them detained indefinitely without due process. Now, both Stabenow and Levin will counter that, oh, there are provisions in here that will allow trials, and no, the president isn't required to use these powers. And both of which it begs the question of, that's not the point. The point is that it even be allowed. The point that a trial is optional, that is the problem. And obviously, anyone with ill intent would just say, well, this is optional. And no, I'm not required to do this, but I'm choosing to do this. So that pretty much is a null argument, and I hear that from both of them. When you have people like Al Franken, Rand Paul, the ACLU, all getting up and saying there's something wrong here, it's not as if these two have some kind of, these groups of people have some kind of alliance with one another. Then it starts to become clear that I'm not just out on the fringe in my interpretation of this.
Interesting you brought up Debbie Stabenow. That's where I was going next as well. And that is, looking at your website, I don't see anything where you're attacking Debbie. If anything,
I keep meaning to put that page up.
It was just interesting looking at that. You bring up the fact that she didn't vote for bailing out the financial sector.
Right, and that's because at this stage of the game, it's within the Republican primary, as far as why I would be a better candidate than Debbie Stabenow. I mean, yeah, that too. But then Peter Hoekstra is that he basically has discredited himself by doing that. And it's not his only vote. He voted for certain things like, I think, the Brady bill and numerous sort of socialized medicine type bills that came through the federal level, and I don't have them listed here, but I should. But he is a person with a mixed voting record, where he could pull out a hand-selected, smorgasbord of votes and say, look, I'm a conservative, I'm one of you. And at the same time, well, I could pull out a whole list of things that say otherwise, though I don't necessarily have that list right in front of me. But the big striking one that really, I think, sends it home was that bailout vote. And that's something that got a lot of people angry, and I really don't see how you could possibly, on a platform of fiscal conservatism, challenge Debbie Stabenow, because it's a matter of him not himself meeting that standard. And actually, I mean, the other, in all fairness, it turns out I'm not the only candidate who feels this way, but essentially, I think he's heard it from pretty much every candidate. Yeah, I can definitely say plenty about Debbie Stabenow, and my biggest gripe, again, is basically her vote to derail our republic, in my opinion, with that passing the National Defense Authorization Act with that that matter, the detainee matters included in the bill.
It doesn't seem to have attracted a lot of national attention, that particular act. How do you get that message out there, that that's out there, and that it's a problem?
Well, obviously, you can only do so much blogging about it, because everyone in the world has a blog now. So you're just kind of like a needle in a haystack sometimes. But one thing I have done to focus a little attention on it, though it hasn't gone anywhere yet, because the Wayne County government fails to comply with the law, was I basically have submitted language, or attempted to submit language, for a recall petition to recall Senator Carl Levin for his role in that matter, and essentially was turned down, even though Section 168.121 of Michigan law specifically says United States senators can be recalled.
What is the likelihood of something like that? I mean, we see the recall process and how long it takes. You're running a campaign. What is the likelihood of something like that gaining traction and actually taking place?
Well, and one thing is, I think a lot of people, it might be higher than one would think, given the much higher threshold one would need to meet. But I think there's a lot more people out there who dislike Carl Levin than at the moment support me. And so I actually see it as having a pretty good likelihood of grabbing some traction if, and here's the big if I can get the Wayne County government to comply with the law, because there is something called clarity review, and that's supposed to happen at a county level. And Carl Levin has repeatedly insisted that he is a resident of the city of Detroit, which is in Wayne County. And so that's where I submitted the language. Now, there is also a part of the law that says that if the Board of Elections in that county fail to carry out their responsibility, that the language submitted shall be regarded as acceptable. So there is also that aspect, that even in the absence of any response by them, once I've made clear, and I'm actually going to send some notarized letters out, that or registered letters out, once it's become clear that they have flatly failed to do their job in spite of seeing what's in front of them, then essentially the language will have been de facto approved.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about money, finances, the economy. We'll be back in 1 minute with Scotty Bowman. And we're back with more West Michigan Week, and we're here with GOP Senate candidate Scotty Bowman. The deficit, it's on everybody's mind. We're talking about the future of this country. If you win, you'll be the senator. How do we take care of this deficit? How do we reduce it? How do we get this country back on good footing?
Well, first of all, deficits, the deficit is something that we create annually. We create a new deficit annually that it's added to the national debt. So the first thing you could do about a deficit is not creating it. Now that may require a rather surprising or harsh amount of cuts initially. But however, there was someone who worked out a way within 3 years of stopping the creation of new deficits, using basically spending cuts to cover that. The savings from the spending cuts therefore would allow for less new debt being created by deficits, and that was Ron Paul. And he outlined a budget plan that involves over $1 trillion in cuts. Now, I don't know the whole thing by heart, and I haven't created my own budget from scratch, but essentially I think he's already crunched all the numbers, and having been experienced in Congress over these years and served on the Financial Services Committee, I think he really understands the economy well enough that what he has presented would be a workable budget. Regardless of what budget one follows exactly, it's a need to cut spending. There is not a matter of the government isn't getting enough tax dollars. It is a matter of the government is spending too much. And as Ronald Reagan once said, you can't raise taxes faster than Congress can spend it. What we need to do is change policy to cut spending. You can't simply cut waste. A lot of Republican candidates that talk about, oh yeah, we're going to cut spending and we're going to get rid of new deficits and start trimming down the debt because we're going to get rid of waste. Well, yeah, you definitely should get rid of waste. I mean, just from, just the use of the word waste already implies it's spending that shouldn't be
Private
happening.
corporations want to do away with waste.
Right.
So, yeah.
But that's not going to be enough. That's still trimming around the edges. You need to change policy. And that's one reason, and this is another area where I differ from some of my opponents, is I am for a non-interventionist foreign policy, which would radically cut spending, at the same time keeping our country secure, because we'd be focused on the defense of our country, which is the only thing really a military policy should involve, is the defense of our country and not the defense of every other country. I hear Republicans frequently bringing up, conservative Republicans frequently bringing up, the wrongfulness of the robbing Peter to pay Paul approach, or the idea that somehow taking money that isn't mine to give and giving it to someone else, how wrong that is, and they condemn that all the time. But when it comes to foreign policy, they seem to have no problem with the idea of taking money from Americans and using it for the defense of foreign countries.
Well, do you protect American interests abroad, or do you protect the oil fields in Saudi Arabia? I mean, how far do you look at in terms of defense? Is it just defending our borders or our interests abroad?
Well, what our interests and what is our property are two different things. Right. And I think the Saudi Arabians have as much interest in defending their oil fields as we do. And so, the short of it is, I believe we need to start having other countries step up in taking responsibility for their own defense. Now, some of them may have wanted to do that all along, but somehow feel constrained by agreements they've had with the United States.
Do you protect Israel?
Well, I believe, again, Israelis, I think, have as much of a imperative to protect Israel as the United States. And the people have often brought up what a good ally they are and all that. And what I bring up also is all the people that are so eager to have other people's money taken to support Israel would use their own money to support Israel, then that's fine with me. And I mean, I know people that are, grew up in America that have gone over under dual citizenship and joined the Israeli army, for that matter. Go right ahead. It's just, I don't believe the role of our government to make people serve the government of another country.
These defense cuts or foreign policy cuts that you talk about, I mean, these dollars do go mostly to Americans, American troops, and the Pentagon, and these are American citizens, and the weapon systems are largely built in the United States, so it's contractors, it's Smith Industries in Grand Rapids and other places that defense dollars do go to Americans and products made in the United States of America. And so cutting them does result in lower spending and less money to other Americans. Isn't that the case? I mean, foreign aid is actually a very minuscule part of the budget, but defense spending really is spending by the United States of America on American citizens and products made in the United States, or at least
well,
most
I
of
would
it
be
is, isn't it?
I would be for defense spending for defense
Right.
purposes. But as far as the role of various companies and how they profit, whether it be Halliburton supposedly building buildings in Iraq that aren't there or whatever, that is one problem I see with the way business is currently done in Washington, is you have constituency groups. And what happens is that politicians will find one cluster of constituency groups, pander to them, pass bills that benefit them, that help them profit, and then begrudge the other party's constituency group who will do the same. So typically, for instance, as an example, you have Democrats putting out all kinds of favors for unions, putting out all kinds of special spending for various social programs, for various minutia of specific programs about like what kids have for lunch in local schools and so forth, to appease different constituent groups. And then on the other hand, we have a lot of the Republican politicians will support various kinds of corporate welfare, and including what sometimes turns into corporate welfare through the military-industrial complex, where there's essentially the notorious cost overruns of defense contracts and so forth. Which, I mean, my approach to that, by the way, is changing the way in which people negotiate defense contracts, which is that once you have competitive bidding and a price is settled on, that is the price. And there isn't this thing where, oh, well, we just realized it costs more. Nope. Well, when you bid, you got to take into account the possibility that your estimates can be wrong and hold people to it.
Where else do you cut, if not beyond the military?
Oh, there's plenty of other places to cut. Another thing that I've brought up a lot is there is nothing in the federal Constitution authorizing the regulation of intrastate commerce. There's an interstate commerce clause, and there'd be no reason to have an interstate commerce clause if it were to apply also to intrastate commerce, because then they'd simply say the federal government has the right to regulate commerce. That isn't what it says. And so for intrastate commerce is trade within states, yet the federal government takes it upon itself to repeatedly regulate whether it be contracts between corporations and unions, be it the sale of controlled substances within state boundaries without crossing state lines. There's no reason for that. That violates the 10th Amendment, which says that the powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the people in the states. And so that should be decided on a state-by-state basis. We also have the entire, like Department of Education. We don't need a Department of Education. When I was growing up, most of the management of the school systems was done locally. And recently, recently to me being maybe kind of an old guy, there was this proposal, one of the Proposal A's a while back, shifted control of our public schools more to the states. And so we now have this thing with these count days where they do a head count of attendance at the schools and then base the disbursement of state dollars back down to all these little districts. So you have this top-down approach. And has education gotten better? No. We see test scores continue to plummet. The students find themselves less employable than they did before. There's no reason. And then finally, at the bottom, it's not even an efficiency issue. Even if it was working efficiently, the bottom line is when you work at something like the Department of Education at the federal level, there's absolutely nothing in the Constitution enumerating a power of Congress to run education. There is nothing in the Constitution enumerating a power of Congress to assist with health care. There is nothing in the Constitution allowing any of these things, yet they go ahead and do it. So whether it be and also, like for instance, the National Labor Relations Board, there's no reason for that constitutionally, as long as you're dealing with commerce within a given location where people are working for a company. That's intrastate commerce, and that's something to be handled at the state level.
I've got just a couple of follow-up questions on that. One, the Supreme Court doesn't really agree.
2 minutes, so keep it short.
The court doesn't really agree with that interpretation of commerce. They have said, for example, a private restaurant is involved in interstate commerce when it buys products that go across state lines, and therefore it's susceptible to congressional regulation. And so isn't that right, that you would really have to introduce a new interpretation of what the Commerce Clause is to the federal court system?
I would have to interpret. I would have to apply an English interpretation rather than a Supreme Court justice legislative from the judicial branch interpretation. And that's another thing. U.S. senators are involved in the appointment of Supreme Court justices as in the approval process of presidential appointments. I pledge I would not appoint any justice that I suspected to be the kind of justice that does not interpret the Constitution narrowly and as intended.
All right, we'll end the discussion here. I'd like to thank the panelists. Doug Kopman, political science professor.
Very good.
Calvin
You got
College.
it, Patrick. Thanks.
Happy Easter.
Thank you. You too.
Dave Murray.
Thank you.
MLive Media Group, thank you for joining us on this Good Friday. And of course, Scotty Bowman,
thank you
GOP candidate for U.S. Senate. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with us this week. We'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.